Welcome to Positive Disintegration, a path to authenticity. In this episode, we are talking to Sergej van Middendorp and Abbie VanMeter from the CMM Institute, and it's going to be a little bit of a preview of their session that they are going to present at the 2024 Dąbrowski Congress this July. Chris and I will be talking to them today about CMM theory, what it is, and how it intersects with the theory of positive disintegration. We'll be talking about how being mindful of our communication with others and sharing our stories contributes to creating better social worlds. So stick around, because whether or not you're interested in ways to communicate better or how communication fits into the framework of positive disintegration, you'll get something from this conversation. Hello, happy listeners, and welcome back to Positive Disintegration. I'm Em Nicholson.
I'm Dr. Chris Wells.
And Chris, today we have two wonderful guests on the podcast.
We do, and this is a long delayed episode that we're recording, so we're happy to finally have them on.
Yeah, we're returning the favour, and also have two people who will be presenting at the 2024 Dąbrowski Congress.
That's right. So this will be kind of a preview of their session, I'm sure.
Without further ado, our two guests today are Sergej van Middendorp and Abbie VanMeter, and they are from the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. And the CMM Institute's mission is to contribute to the making of better social worlds by reflecting on current patterns of communication and building better ones. Sergej helps generate healthy systems with action research-based practice in improvisation, design and communication. In the Netherlands, he facilitates a collaborative support network of caregivers and IT providers in their development of an integral digital health system. Abbie VanMeter is the host of Stories Live, Stories Told podcast, which you might remember Chris and I being on. In partnership with CMM Institute, she is involved in a number of projects that work to make the tools, language and knowledge offered by the communication theory, the CMM, more accessible. Welcome, Sergej and Abbie.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you. We loved being guests on Stories Live, Stories Told last year, and it was interesting to come on and talk about our stories of positive disintegration. And I think I speak for both of us that we're excited to have you both on today to talk about your experiences and your stories. And I think that you both probably know that the first thing that we ask people is how they first discovered Dąbrowski's theory. And so we would love to hear that from both of you.
I discovered the theory about two and a half years ago. My wife forwarded me a webpage which advertised a course by Lotte van Lith called Unlocking Becoming. And at that point, I was looking for ways to bring my recent learning in dealing with giftedness into my practice, because we had recently discovered that both our daughter and our son are gifted. And that for us was the first label that actually worked to make sense of the struggles they had in their lives up to that point. They were young adults by that time, had been wrestling with all sorts of issues, which had various labels that didn't really work. And by the time I found that webpage, that advertisement by Lotte, we had overcome several major hurdles thanks to this understanding of their giftedness. And I was looking for ways to actually share my experience with helping them as a parent, now being young students in university, and understanding that many young students might still struggle with something or not understanding this. I was thinking, how can I learn to support young students, gifted young students, in their learning? And then I found this webpage and I joined the course, and that's how I learned about the theory with Lotte and a small team of therapists, of coaches together.
I love that connection with Lotte too, that it's like a small world, kind of, the people who know the theory, a small community. And it's just so cool to hear about these connections. So thank you. And then you introduced it to Abbie, and how I'll be interested to hear how that worked.
Yeah, I can pick up here. So Sergej, along with another colleague and friend of ours, Merritt, who's involved with the CMM Institute, did a presentation for us about the relationship that they were starting to see between CMM and TPD. And at that time, I was starting a new season, the second season of Stories Lived, Stories Told, and looking for suggestions from the Board of Stewards, of which Sergej is a member from the CMM Institute, to say, who do you think should be on the podcast? What kind of stories do we want to be telling? Who can we be in collaboration with? And Sergej had pointed me towards the two of you, because at that point, I think had gone beyond Lottie and got to know the work that you guys were doing. And so I learned about it when I reached out to you, and you were very excited to be on my podcast. So I started doing some of my own research, but maybe just scratch the surface, because I wanted to leave my understanding for the stories that you were going to share with me on the podcast, and that shaped my understanding a lot. And I just listened back to those episodes in preparation for this. I wanted to refresh myself. And yeah, I was just so struck by what felt important, that both of you spoke to the experience that while TPD is so huge for the gifted community, that goes beyond what it means to be gifted in school. Because that was really my experience with giftedness up to that point, my understanding of giftedness. I've spoken to a gifted educator, Stephanie Higgs, I work with closely, and she knows your work as well, and that matters to her. And both of you spoke to what giftedness meant outside of school, and that was a little trickier to define and make meaning around. And so that from my understanding of the stories you shared on my podcast, that was really where positive disintegration helped you was a helpful tool for you.
It has been a helpful tool. That feels like such an understatement in my life personally, but yeah, for sure. Well, can you tell our listeners a bit about the CMM Institute and the work that you do? I don't know how you want to do that.
Right. Before we get to the Institute, we're missing an important question, particularly for our listeners. And this is a question that I had when we were going into Abbie's podcast. It's like, what is the theory of CMM? Because if we're going to start talking about how the two theories relate, I guess, people who've been hanging around our podcast for a while know what positive disintegration is, but can you give people an insight on what CMM is as a theory before we launch into what you guys do at the Institute?
I'll start with my personal relationship to CMM is that I was in college studying interpersonal communication and sitting in my comm theory class in probably 2021 and learned about this theory along with a lot of others, and it kind of just stuck with me. And so I returned to it because it was compelling to me, and eventually was able to build a relationship with Kim Pierce, who's the president of the CMM Institute. And yeah, it's led to so many good things in my life, including the podcast and a lot of great relationships. But CMM is really compelling to me, and I think I relate to it similarly to how you all relate to TPD in terms of the language and the concepts that were presented to me in the theory really resonated, and then made me feel very compelled to kind of spread the good news of CMM. And, I felt empowered in the theory and wanted to empower other people. Basically, it is a theory of communication, and it, truly started as a theory, but the hope is that it continue to evolve into this practice that's accessible to people and tangible in our real lives. I'll go a little theory heavy to start, and then hopefully try to break it down. So there's this main claim in CMM, which stands for Coordinated Management of Meaning, CMM. And the claim is that persons in conversation co-construct their own social realities and are simultaneously shaped by the worlds they create. And again, that's some kind of big language, but at the core of that is that we're participants in our social world, and we get to make choices about the stories we tell and the meaning we make and the way we show up to each other. And in our communication, in the relationships we build, we're affecting our social worlds. And in return, those social worlds are always affecting us back. So it is this relational piece. So yeah, that's probably where I'd start. There's a real focus on, storytelling and meaning making in the storytelling. So I guess to break down the title, literally, Coordinated Management of Meaning is that the coordinating referring to that relational piece, that you have to be in collaboration and co-create with other people. So what does that relational piece look like? And then it's only natural for us to want to manage the meaning we make. We're trying to make sense of the world. We're trying to make things coherent. And then truly the acknowledgement that meaning is socially constructed, is that we all have a role in creating it. It's not innate. And so there's value in the practice of kind of unpacking and asking questions about the meaning that's been handed to you and saying, does this work for me? Would I like to create some new meaning about this? Can we as a community create new meaning around something?
Yeah, I think you're so well versed when you introduce the theory that I'm always in awe listening to how you do that. But what I would add is that some assumptions behind how CMM presents its concepts are that each perspective is unique and the sum of perspectives is not commensurable. It's not perfect. There is no perfect meaning or innate meaning, as Abbie just said. So if you follow that assumption, then indeed we have to make that meaning together and acknowledge that this will always be unfinished, imperfect, and the best we can do. And while that is humbling from one way of making meaning of this, it's also empowering in the sense that when acting into a context, into a story, we do have some power to shape that social world together. That's also what attracted me to the theory.
That was a really beautiful introduction to the theory, and I have a few places where my mind wants to go with it. I mean, for one thing, I'm thinking about the fact that like the third factor dynamism and the theory of positive disintegration is all about the conscious choice in your development, you know, your decision making and the action that you take. And that to me is so aligned with CMM and this shared meaning making. I mean, we are coordinated, you know, meaning making. But at the same time, I'm also thinking about an episode we did on nonviolent communication, because in that episode we talked about a shared reality, and I think that that's something where, you know, it's not just in the individual. Like when we're directing our lives and ourselves and finding our place in the world and creating our path, I mean, we have to remember that we are social beings. It's not just us. Like it has to be in community and relationship too. And so I think that this is a place where, like me personally, I've been thinking a lot lately about that, how like it's not just me and my development and where I'm going as the individual, but I'm part of a family, I'm part of a community. And so I think that that's just something that I really love about what you do in your work.
Because you and Michael both said to me on, you know, plenty of occasions that when we talk about theory of positive disintegration, which centers around human values and how they change, values don't just happen in a bubble. Like your standards of behavior, of how you act, are going to impact everybody around you, which is why you need them. If you were the only person on earth, how you behaved wouldn't matter so much, you know? So we have to be mindful through, you know, empathy and thinking of people subjectively. Everything that Dąbrowski speaks about in the theory is in relation to others. And so to me, it makes a lot of common sense that the way that you speak to people and the quality of the conversations and how you listen to them and take in their perspective and everything to do in communication is part of the whole how you behave with others piece.
It's so good to hear both of you say everything you just said, because you're immediately getting to the conclusion that Sergej and I have come to as we've thought about our presentation for the Dąbrowski Congress and what is that relationship between CMM and TPD. So that's very reassuring. But yeah, as I kind of map out TPD in my head, which I know both of our theories got a lot of layers, very complex. So I'm trying to think about this big image and where exactly does CMM intersect with TPD. And one of the conclusions we came to is that it is in that third factor. And also that, like what you both kind of just alluded to, you could see it as TPD is about this kind of internal thing that is happening in you, your own personality development. And then CMM can kind of go hand in hand with it and address, take care of, respond to the external part, which is what you're saying, that it is, you are going through your own disintegration, your own personality development in relationship to people. You're not doing that in a bubble. And so what does it look like to communicate what things mean to you? What does it look like to tell your story to other people, to try to be understood, to try to understand, to show up with curiosity in your relationships as you're disintegrating?
Yeah, that's the intersection. It's so interesting to me. And it's one thing that's cool is that it's true that I too went back and to our episodes from last year and was thinking about personally where I was last year and how I had to ask you guys to hold off. I mean, it just was a tough spring last year. And I mean, I just went through a lot of thoughts about the conversations we had and how much I appreciated you, your patience, your willingness to put it off. And then we had a conversation, in the summer, and just, it's been interesting as a podcaster and somebody who studies this theory to see relationships develop with people that we have on the podcast or that we meet through the podcast, and how our community has expanded and kind of evolved since we started it, and how special that is. And when I think about the intersections between the work that we're doing, it's really exciting. And I'm excited that you're on Substack now with CMM and you've put the podcast there. And there's just, I think it'll be easier now to share our work with each other. And I don't know, it's exciting. It's cool to see these things evolve and grow.
I deeply appreciate indeed how that process has gone, and also how we understand each other, that these are long-term processes and relationships that we're making and building. And thinking back to what you mentioned, the episode about nonviolent communication, I happened to listen to that one last week. It was one I skipped somehow or missed, and I see relationships between what was discussed there, the theory of positive disintegration, and CMM, also in the explicit mention of values or ethics or needs as forces in how we engage and make meaning together. CMM also has this rather explicit goal to make better social worlds. So that assumes that things can be better than they are. It actively wonders, what are we making and how can we make it better? But it also has an interesting paradox when it comes to values, because Barnett Pearce, one of the co-founders of CMM, said that values, as we express them as one way to frame our ethics coming into something, we can't know what better is until we are in the moment communicating together. So somehow we have to let go of all that and at the same time try, and I think I remember that from the episode I listened to on the needs, to have a reflexive consciousness in the moment for what we are doing, what we are saying, what meaning we make of it, while also trying to bring in the best of what we can, given our values or understanding each other's needs as they evolve in our conversation. I also recognize some similarities between these three theories there.
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that, because I can't even remember what it was I was reading, but it was something Dąbrowski wrote. I've been going through a lot of his books lately, looking for stuff. And he was talking about that when you get to higher parts of your development, the work that you've done on yourself and your higher values are going to inevitably filter through to the world. If you have a particular interest in the justice system, for example, and you go in there and you become active in it because that's what you value, whatever you do and say and bring to that, as you would say, a social world, can in fact change what happens there by bringing in new perspectives and new ideas. So that also connects to another podcast that we had with another person who's going to happen to be presenting, which is Kate Arms, who talked about positive disintegration can take place in an organization. So the ripple effects of all this stuff can be very powerful.
Definitely. So I'm noticing that we're making relationships between different themes and concepts that we know and that were part of our ongoing conversations. And I think that a potential contribution of bringing CMM into the community is that CMM itself is not themed other than the themes of then the assumptions, I would say, and the goals of CMM in how it can be used as a practical theory. It doesn't say anything about the subject or the themes that you want to address with it. And there I also see a potential and strong reinforcement, because the theory of positive disintegration, I think, is pretty strongly typed in terms of how development happens and all the factors and forces and the dynamisms that come into that. So, and I haven't figured it out yet, but that's something I'm looking forward to learning as we continue to engage here and in the broader community on how these two will shape and co-shape each other.
I'm glad you bring that up, Sergej, because that makes me think of the way that I've really been relating to CMM recently for myself and in this season of my podcast is to really use CMM as a lens and talk about it as a communication perspective. And the metaphor of, glasses works for me as a glasses wearer most of my life. 3 of us on here have our glasses, and I have, you can have the sunglasses, I guess what's at the core of it to me is that when I put on my glasses, things that were blurry become clear. And then maybe you put on sunglasses and things look darker. So you can put on this kind of communication perspective, put on this communication lens that is afforded by CMM, and look at what I think you're saying. Look at anything, and it's going to show you something new. You're going to see it differently by looking through the lens of communication. And that's another tie back to positive disintegration, is that this heavy emphasis on meaning making, really, because that's kind of what I see TPD having done for a lot of people in your community. I heard it in both of your stories. I've heard it in many other people's experiences, that it was, oh my gosh, now I have this language for something I've already experienced, but I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't know how to make meaning of what was going on in me. And now I have this language. That's one way to make meaning of it. And again, it's empowering, I think, in both ways to understand that you have the ability to make new meaning. That was really what first drew me to CMM, because it was like such a revolutionary idea to me, because there weren't conversations like this happening for me growing up. And so it was very much, the meaning felt innate because I didn't know to question where it came from. And so once it was shown to me that, well, look at the history, look at the people that have been involved, look at the motivations that people had. Why was this meaning maybe created, and does that still serve us? Is those questions that Sergej was getting at, is that you can kind of sit where you are and do that reflection, which is so valuable, so that you can see patterns and turns and how you contributed. That's some of the language we would use in CMM to talk about the patterns, especially. And you can look back and say, what did we make? Or kind of how do we get there? What are we making now? And then also working towards this alignment, similar to TPD, whereas if our goal is the better social world and we can define for ourselves what we truly believe a better social world is, and then kind of work backwards. Okay, if I believe that is where I'm working towards, how would I act now? And so this alignment of the values, and you talk about, authentic self being that alignment. I'd say authenticity is, in my definition, certainly part of a better social world.
Yeah, that brings me back to what I learned when I actually joined the course with Lotte and that small team, to also make sense of my own life and our life as a family, the life of our kids, the life of my loved ones, through the lens of positive disintegration. And I had learned about developmental theories, I think, since the year 2000, when I first read Ken Wilber's work, an American philosopher who also brings development as one important dimension into his thinking. And all those different theories, even CMM, Barnett Peirce at some point used Robert Kegan's developmental psychology, moral development as a frame to look at communication. But there was always something nagging there, like, well, does it really work that way? And what about this? What about that? And what I really appreciated about the theory of positive disintegration is its complexity, its inherent complexity in dealing with these kinds of nagging issues, while still remaining somewhat developmental-ish, we might say in CMM.
Yeah.
But that was such an epiphany.
I was thinking of the personality ideal while you were talking, Abbie, like that. Once you have an ideal in mind, then you have something to work toward too. But until you have that image of who you want to be or where you want to go, it's hard to actually get there. And so it's an interesting thing where once you do have the language or the framework that can help you make sense of the past, it goes into the future too. It's an interesting thing how it works. I mean, like the influence that goes both ways, like, and the way that you can, I mean, one thing that's been really incredible to realize in my own life is how I've been able to heal so much of the past by having this language and this way of understanding it, and how that really has rippled out to people in my life that, were also a part of my past and who will still be a part of my future too. And it's something that I never could have anticipated happening until I had this. But also another thing that came to mind that I don't want to lose is that I wonder, I mean, Abbie, for you to be a student, discover the CMM theory, and now to have a podcast and to be gathering stories. I just know from us as podcasters, our word count on transcripts at this point is like, I mean, I want to say like around 400,000 words. And so I wonder, like, as you're collecting podcast episodes and stories, like you are actually also creating like a research base that you can work with. And I think that that's another kind of incredible part of this work where, you go into it kind of innocently, like, oh, I just want to put it out there and talk about this stuff. But you're also like accumulating data and information that you can work with.
To go back to really the heart of CMM, there's a couple models that are really useful. And one of them is where the name for the podcast, Stories Lived, Stories Told, comes from. And it's called the loop model. And so it's L and then 5, but really could be infinite U's and then 2 T's. And so the L standing for lived stories, and then the U's represent untold stories, unheard stories, untellable stories, undigested stories is the one that was just kind of officially added. Which one am I forgetting, Sergej? Did I say untellable?
Unknown, I think.
Unknown. Yes, thank you. That's the last one. And then the 2 T's, first T representing the act of storytelling, and then the last one being our stories told. So that model just works to acknowledge that, okay, we live a story. And then in the telling of the story, that's where the meaning part comes in. That's where the making meaning comes in because, there's no objective reality of what happened. We could have the same experience. We could all go away from this podcast recording telling a different story about what happened, having made different meaning of it. None would be wrong or right. They would just each be our own stories told. And so the heart of the podcast for me is this idea that there are so many of those U's. There's so many untold or unheard stories, and the stories we tell shape us, and also the untold stories shape us. The lack of the stories shape us because, for example, if you're growing up and you're being told that you're gifted, but you've never heard a story about what that means that resonates with you, then that's maybe a really lonely feeling, and that's how it shapes you. And so for the podcast, it's to me about what does it look like for me to be really intentional about creating a space where people can show up and tell their stories, whether they've been previously untold or not, so that people listening can have heard a new story maybe, or can have heard, I just think the more stories, the better. That's probably like the greatest tool that we can have is to have heard more stories, because then that expands what you think is possible. That expands that ideal of what a better social world could be, because maybe your better social world is kind of limited. Not that you would, maybe know that until you've heard other stories that then make you be able to use your imagination bigger and come up with new stories based on the stories that you've heard. So it is really meaningful for me to get to hear so many stories, and I feel well equipped with CMM, and that's been its own evolution for myself as well, how I relate to the theory through this process. And Chris, everything you were saying was making me think that Sergej and I a while ago recorded a podcast for Stories Lived, Stories Told, not a regular episode, but he and I were reflecting on other episodes because we wanted that reflection piece is so important and we wanted to demonstrate that. And the title of that episode ended up being Plan for Emergence, because emergence is this other really key aspect of CMM. And, before we started recording, we talked about, okay, we just want to be conversational and we want the conversation to, grow and evolve as it will. And that's really what emergence is about. And I think in our conversation, that title came out of me talking about that I'm kind of a natural planner and prefer to feel like I'm in control of things at least. But what happens and what becomes possible when you expect the unexpected, maybe another way to say that, or expect that things will emerge as you are participating in the moment.
It's funny that you're talking about this, like, expecting the unexpected, understanding the power of untold stories, all these things like point to something Chris touched on when we're talking about personality ideal, insofar as if you have more positive notions of how communication can be, of the power of stories, of letting things emerge, of, how social world, you just said, like, you can imagine a social world and something could be much bigger beyond your current imagination. Like, that looking forward to the light part and having direction there is really powerful. And it's also really powerful in positive disintegration to have a personality ideal, to know what you're walking towards in the light rather than running from the dark. Because I think in positive disintegration, can't remember what I was reading again, but Dąbrowski was talking about gifted people being more prone to psychoneurosis rather than being driven by their personality ideal. Chris can jump in and correct me, but it's almost like he was describing a situation where you're more running from the shadows rather than actively running towards the light. And I think sometimes we do that in communication as well. We only realize what good communication may even look like at a very vague thing because we just had a shit interaction. Something went tits up and all of a sudden we're in an argument and it's like, whoa, what happened there? And for some people, that's why communication's difficult, whether it's in the workplace or in their own relationships, because all they know about any sort of direction is to run from the dark. So they don't really give it any thought when it's all okay, but they do give it thought when it all goes to shit.
Yeah, that reminds me of something I was thinking about in walking our dogs just before I came into the episode that we're recording. That's the paradox inherent in the title of the theory, right? Positive disintegration. And when I was ruminating on that, I thought there's like a perpetuum mobile already embodied in these terms. It moves somehow. It starts a process, and the process of wondering also, like, what? So it sort of raises your consciousness to really think, what exactly is being said there? And this awareness, I think, also in CMM, when Abbie says planning for emergence, does a similar thing, like what? So two concepts that normally are not aligned or flow easy in our consciousness are sort of juxtaposed and raise our awareness. And this raising of our awareness in itself makes us conscious of the process that may be going on and afford that shift to, this is where this could go. And if this is where this could go, and it allows for the imperfection and the disintegration and the psychoneurosis, not as inhibiting or pathologizing or pathologic, that's a liberation on that level. And maybe in a micro way, that is that shift from integration to disintegration itself. So, the metaphor, I would say, embodied in the title is beautiful.
I agree. And it's interesting because I don't think, talk enough about how consciousness is such a huge part of the theory of positive disintegration, and how really the unilevel disintegration is a problem of narrowed consciousness in so many ways. And that getting out of that and reaching like the multi-level place where you want to be in this theory means that you have reached a higher level of consciousness and that you have kind of gained an elevation or a perspective that you didn't have before, and that allows you a way out of it. And so I love your plan for emergence, and these paradoxes. I think like that's just such a key part of growth and development. And I've thought a lot lately about how when people feel like they're mentally ill, like when they're really struggling with what they're seeing as a mental illness, whether it's anxiety or depression or what, so often the problem is that you have inadvertently gotten to a point where you're kind of stuck in your suffering, or you're even at perhaps like creating your own suffering without meaning to. And until you reach a place where you realize that you have a part in this and you can find your own way out of it, you feel stuck. And so, when you think about how much getting out of your own stuckness or suffering often involves an increased awareness of other people, what you can do for other people, it helps you get out of your own pain sometimes to realize how much you can offer other people. That I think that's just kind of another place of connection with coordinated meaning making, because the more we're stuck in our own heads and our own suffering, the harder it is to realize like how much value we have for other people in the world, And when I was younger and I was struggling through times that I considered mental illness, I was so focused on my own problems and my own pain and hurt. And the way out of that was figuring out that I could do something in the world, that I could help other people, and other people were the focus that helped me get out of that. And so when you do open yourself up to the possibility of growth and emergence, like once you open the door to that, like that's how that light gets in.
Yeah, I'd love to pick up the piece of that, like awareness or consciousness that you talk about, because that's what I think is so important. A lot of people, you want to jump right to action. What do we do? What do we do? But if you can't name a problem, then you don't do anything, but you don't know it exists. You're not even a problem. But if you can't name an experience you're having, then you don't talk about that experience. You don't do anything about that experience. And that's more, even the awareness piece speaks more broadly to how I think about communication in general. CMM is a great lens. It's not the only one. I have a couple thoughts about communication in general. One is that when I was in high school and people started asking me, what are you going to study in college? I thought, oh, I really am passionate about like communication. That's so fascinating to me. And when I said that, I was thinking like interpersonal communication. Basically, what I ended up studying exactly is what I had in mind. I would say that to people and they'd go, oh, so like marketing? I thought, no, that's not what I mean. And they'd say, oh, so like social media stuff. I'm like, am I wrong? Am I wrong about what communication means? Because I was just getting so much of that. I was like, I must be wrong. Maybe what I'm talking about doesn't exist. And so I actually ended up going into university studying political science. And then thankfully I was like on the speech team, which is part of the communication. So I got to know a couple of the communication professors and was like, oh, I was right all along. This thing does exist. Other people just didn't know about it. And I'd say that's very characteristic maybe of a lot of theory and ideas and knowledge that exist around communication. People just don't know about it. And we see communication as this kind of abstract thing that's happening to us, and we don't even know how to think about it. Again, we don't have that language, so we don't think about it. We don't talk about it. And I think it's absolutely ridiculous that we're expected to just pick up healthy communication practices along the way. We are all learning something about communication from our families, from our societies, from our peers. Every interaction we have, is teaching us something, whether that's, helpful or not, is dependent on the situation. But I'm, very early on can picture myself sitting in my introduction to interpersonal communication class saying, this is the class that every student should have to take. Everyone's taking finance 101 and public speaking, but this is the class that everybody is having interpersonal relationships, and everybody should have these tools. So that's why I feel like so passionate about. You shouldn't have to be an academic. You shouldn't have to have picked interpersonal communication as your major like I did to get to know this stuff. And that's why it should be accessible. And I want to kind of transition this because that toolbox part really is kind of how I see it. If you can just have this knowledge, have this language in your back pocket, then you can bring it out when you need to. And that's kind of a perspective that I've really been able to develop in conversation with Sergej, who comes from this idea of talking about improvisation as a metaphor. And that's been really meaningful for coloring my understanding. So, Sergej, if you want to talk about improvisation at all, I think that'd be a meaningful connection to make now.
Yeah, definitely. And the pattern that connects, I think, the last few turns is indeed this idea of relationship or interpersonal. Also in the stories, as I've had the pleasure of listening to them on the Positive Disintegration podcast, and also in our own community, there's a lot of stories about community, like these two theories and the people involved with it know each other, help each other, have study groups, have projects, organize conferences, learning exchanges. So these theories indeed don't develop from ivory tower academics. They develop in community and relationship. These relationships, when I talk from my own experience, are also healing relationships and learning relationships. So the interdependence, I think, between the concepts and the theories and the tools and the relationships and the communities in which they are made are well, you can't really separate those. And that's a good thing. And there is a bridge to the idea of improvisation there, because improvisation itself, like Emma said, right? However you behave, if you're the only person on earth, it doesn't matter. And however well you play your instrument, if you're the only one playing it, well, it could be personal practice. But do we hear a tree falling down when there's no one in the forest? So also this idea of improvisation, whether it's theater improvisation or jazz improvisation, is deeply relational and co-creative. Initially maybe between a few musicians, but then at least between the band and their audience, and then in the community of learners of their instruments, bringing their performance to a stage. And in my own learning, I at some point ran into a learning curve about language and abstract ideas, and felt a desire to make it more tangible, and started working with a jazz band informed by ideas on organizational improvisation, and learning how jazz musicians make sense of what they're doing in playing their instrument together, in getting to a groove, in how they use structure, because they use much more structure than you would think to improvise, and sort of bringing those stories into organizations. That has really helped me make sense also of how, when you use that metaphor to look at other contexts, we make meaning. So for me, CMM, I discovered CMM after this period of working with the jazz band, was such a natural fit, because to me, it was like the musical notation for improvised conversation. And like musicians who want to grow their skill can use these techniques and these tools to grow. That's what CMM became for me. It actually helped me shift from a focus in that time on the metaphor of improvisation to improvising with metaphors, which was a major developmental shift in my thinking and being.
Chris, did you want to ask that? Do you want to talk about the Institute question again? Since I so rudely cut you off the first time, like 40 minutes ago, and we never got back to it.
Well, that was the actual question I had. I wanted them to talk about the theory, not the Institute first. So good job. But yeah, I mean, please do feel free to tell us more about your work before you wrap up. The only other question I had was whether you wanted to give more of a preview of what you're going to talk about for the Congress.
I think this whole conversation's been a great preview. It's all the ideas we've already been playing with. And again, you can know that we're going to be guided by emergence. And so we're doing a lot of reflecting and thinking and preparing, and also leaving a lot of room for emergence, and see what, we can co-create, the two of us, along with the community that's there. But yeah, to answer the question of what does the Institute do, I think it's a really similar mission to the Dąbrowski Center, is that we love this theory and we see it being meaningful for people. And so we want to get it to people and find ways to make it practical, and just do more work with it so that more and more people can pick it up as a lens, so that it can change their lives, so that it can change their social worlds for the better.
Indeed. Yeah. When the Institute was founded in 2010, the theory had been developing over 3 decades by then, I think, and a large community of scholars, practitioners had been in touch with it. So there was this community and these different sub-communities that were researching it, further developing it, applying it. And we saw a real need to sort of institutionalize that or make a support organization to keep that community evolving. So we've been organizing learning exchanges, as we call them, which are the community comes together around a theme, usually different work forms, like a mini conference. We have fellowships, which we have every year. So we invite some scholars, some practitioners in, usually also around a theme, and support them to apply CMM in some way to what they bring to us in their fellowship. Obviously, we support Abbie with her podcast project. There's a number of tools that have been evolved that we can use along the lifeline. We started with Cosmo Kids, supporting kids in kindergarten to have difficult conversations together, guided by teachers, using CMM concepts. And we did research on that, and we're co-evolving with that research. We learned how that can improve the relationships between children and teachers, children, teachers, and parents, because kids also bring this learning back home, we found to our surprise. So that's a few examples of initiatives that the Institute supports. There's more. You can see that on our website, cmminstitute.org. If you want to get in touch, you can also do that through that website.
Yeah, the other two things I want to point out real quick is that we have two new websites really, is that Cosmo Kids is just first in the line of Cosmo activities that led to Cosmo Tweens, which has a couple different activities within it. We just published the Cosmo Teens. We had a fellowship around that. They created a comic book about mental health and their own stories. And again, it's all about generating conversation. And I'm working right now collaboratively to try to come up with the next turn, which would be Cosmo Parents, and talk about bringing these resources to parents. And all of those can now be accessed for free. They're available for free on cosmoactivities.com. And then also, like Chris said, we have a Substack now. So it's just the CMM Institute on Substack. And that our hope is going to be a home for resources. I've been creating, along with the podcast videos and infographics that are just supposed to be helpful, break down the theory. And then we also hope that can be a spot for the community to connect and be in dialogue with each other. And yeah, again, with what the mission of the Institute is, to just keep these conversations alive and get this theory in people's hands so that it can better their lives in social worlds.
Well, thank you so much. It's so exciting to have this kind of conversation with you both and to bring theories together. As somebody who studies theory kind of full time, it's exciting to talk with other people who live in this kind of world and grapple with applying it and studying it. And so, I mean, thanks so much. And thank you too to CMM for being a sponsor of the Dąbrowski Congress. We really appreciate you not only presenting, but also your sponsorship, and it's such a pleasure to be connected with you both and your institute. So thank you so much. And Merritt, who isn't here with us, but she's here with us at heart.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks so much to both of you for being on. It's been fantastic to talk to you both again, and we'll be really excited to see you at the Dąbrowski Congress in July.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, till then.
And Chris, thank you for coming along. Always a pleasure.
It is always a pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you, listeners. We always enjoy having you with us too. Continue your path to authenticity through the links in the show notes. Subscribe to our Substack newsletter for stacks of cool things delivered straight to your inbox. Explore the Dąbrowski Centre, email us, or join us on social media. And don't forget to show your love by liking, subscribing, grabbing some positive Disintegration merch, or leaving us a rating or review on your podcast platform.